quickly. There's not much that was in my favor in his mind. It started out slow and incrementally. It was, I couldn't cook. He was right about that. I couldn't do laundry appropriately. I didn't look good enough. Someone as young as I was, he said, should have a better build, right? I should be more toned and fit. Never mind that I had 2 kids, but there was nothing good about me. And what I hadn't realized was that I had been isolated over time. And if I wanted to be with friends, he would say, why are you with that person? They're not a good influence. If I wanted to pursue a hobby, it was, you don't have time for that. I'm doing the work in this household. You need to take care of the kids fully by yourself. A few years in marriage, I had no transportation, no friendships. My kind of odd family relationships were really distant because he could not say enough negative things about my family. And so I was pretty alone with my 2 kids. And I felt like, okay, I made my bed. I'm going to lie in it. I've got 2 amazing daughters. They are tiny and cute and adorable. They will not grow up with divorced parents. And so I will stay in there. And then came the day in March of 1990, trigger alert, because we talk a little bit about violence in this, but he strangled me in front of my oldest daughter. She was 2. And so that was a moment where, as my breath is leaving, if I survive this, I'm out. I mean, I am out. She does not deserve this. And I know that kids who witness violence and who think this is the expectation in a marriage are more likely to repeat those patterns. No more. I'm not going to lie in my bed. That's a ridiculous idea. I'm going to get out once and for all and start a new future. And that was pretty bold for somebody who I'd had a little bit of college, but I had no way to support myself and no financing in my corner. But I decided that day I'm out. And so longer story to the leaving, but eventually I stayed in the battered women's shelter that I eventually went to work in, the domestic violence shelter. We called it battered women then, and brought the girls, and we began life anew. And I believed beyond belief, I was sure that the key to ending domestic abuse was that victims needed to make better choices. Like a lot of people, I thought, well, if victims had better self-esteem, if they made better choices, if they just left, the whole thing would end and there would be no problem. And really looking back, that's pretty old school thinking, but that was the generation I was in, 1990 when I left. And, I thought if I could just keep my commitment, move forward, move the needle forward every day, raise my kids, things will get better. I was mistaken. I was very mistaken. I went to sign up for public assistance, and I remember thinking, because I didn't want to at first, I had a babysitting job. I thought, well, this will be great. But babysitter fired me because she said, you bring inherent danger to my family when you show up with your kids and your former husband's out there, or your husband, a strange husband, is out there. So I lost that job. She was not wrong. That would have brought her family danger, but I wasn't seeing it at the time. So I signed up for public assistance, and the worker, when I was signing up for benefits, said, hey, you got a little college. Did it ever occur to you to go back to school, get a Pell Grant, get your degree? And I remember saying to her, my kids were like dirty and they're crawling around the floor and I'm so frazzled. And I said, go back to college. Do you realize how old I'd be if I went to college? And by the time I finished, I would be 28. And she said, well, sweetie, how old do you think you're going to be in a few years anyway? You could be 28 with a degree. You could be 28 without a degree. And so I decided then that I would get a Pell Grant, which I did, and go back to school. And eventually I got some daycare benefits, but it was much later. So just trying to juggle 2 little bitty kids who were very traumatized, got them into play therapy and, started a life. In the process, I did some things like parenting classes and therapy myself that Medicaid would pay for. And, as much as I could learn, I did, and kept that hope alive. Someday, I'm not going to need anyone for assistance. I'm going to be standing on my own 2 feet supporting these kids. Had a protective order. And the more I became self-sufficient, what I learned was the scarier things got. So it was things such as when my husband had visits, time to be with the kids, he would talk to them, and as they got a little bit older, they would bring back the messages to me. First of all, and this is very common with our kids who have witnessed domestic violence, the caseloads that you're working, kids are used as kind of probation officers and monitors. So my kids would be asked questions like, who was with you? Has your mom had visitors? Who's been in the house? Always wanting to see if, in fact, I had been dating. The kids brought home other messages as they got just a little bit older. And remember, they were tiny girls. Mom, Daddy says that you're not going to want us. You're going to meet someone else and you're not going to want us anymore. Mommy, Daddy says that you're going to die. Mommy, Daddy says that you're going to die and you're going to go to hell. And so these messages from tiny little kids who've been told, to carry these messages back to me as the years go on. 2 years after I left, I got my degree, and that took a ton of work. And of course, the kid's father showed up at graduation, uninvited, unexpectedly. There were times where I'd get protective orders and they would naturally wear out. We had supervised visits, which are very hard to get still to this day. I know in Tennessee and Chattanooga, we have supervised visitation monitors who do this work. It's very difficult, unfunded, hard to get supervised visits to keep kids safe from these kind of dangerous comments. So my kids sort of decompensated, but they still had play therapy. They still had preschool, eventually regular school. They still had, a nice home. And I got my degree. So exciting. And eventually went to work as a community educator and a group facilitator for women who'd been in abusive relationships. I felt like I was on top of the world. $10 an hour I made supporting my family on it. I had a roommate, Barbara. She was like a pseudo grandmother to my kids. And we lived no longer in subsidized housing. I was not on food stamps. I was thrilled. But things like break-ins to the house, tires being slashed, all of those things still went on. And so it was kind of a lot to juggle. I'm a survivor helping other survivors of domestic violence, and I'm still being victimized. So were my kids. 4 years after I left my husband, 4 long years. He took, had time to see our daughters on unsupervised visits at that point and disappeared. And not only did he disappear, he disappeared from the state of Alaska, from the United States, and out of the country. And he went to his home country of Greece. Now, before we married, I thought I was so clever by finding out that he was, in fact, of course, a United States citizen before I married him. He wasn't looking for a green card or anything like that. So I felt like somehow or another that made me safe. It did not. He was a dual citizen, took the girls, took our daughters, and went to Greece. This was against our divorce decree. We had it very well outlined that where he could go when he saw the kids because of past threats. He'd threatened to kill me. He'd threatened to take the kids and disappear. So we had provisions in our custody order, which talked about what he had to do to be able to take them even out of the state of Alaska. And it was very well documented and outlined. And of course, if somebody's going to commit a crime like this, they're just going to do it. So he just disappeared. People told me at the time, and this would be a theme that kind of defined how I felt about resilience and also about dealing with trauma. People said, but you're so lucky they're young, Liz. You are so lucky because one day you'll get them back and they'll never remember because they're so small. My kids at that point were probably the cutest ages children could ever be, which were 4 and 6 years old. Adorable. And you'll get them back and then they'll never remember it. It's going to be great. And it's good that I stupidly believe that. If you've ever gone to DMV as an example and tried to get your license renewed, then you know, dealing with government, I mean, you're government workers, but we can all agree that it's not fun. It's just not fun dealing with all of the different things that you need to bring, let's say different documents, dealing with different personalities, the wait lines, all of that. Imagine trying to get your kids extricated from a foreign country, because I had to deal with our local government, with federal government, and then with Greek government. It was a nightmare. It truly was. And just to give you the movie does not cover this because there's only 90 minutes of the movie, right? So the book does. But as an example, I had a detective on my case initially who, what I didn't realize, had already known my former husband because he had groomed her to pave the way to be able to take the kids. He literally called her to find out what a parent would need to do to take their kids out of country, kind of making her think that I was going to do it, like I was going to take the kids and disappear. So she had accidentally given him kind of a blueprint for how to do what he did. So when I showed up and my case was assigned to her, she didn't tell me this. And she tried to block anything I did to get the kids back. Eventually, that was all resolved, but not before we lost a whole month of work trying to get the federal government working for us. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children were fabulous to deal with, but dealing with the local government was not easy. The State Department told me, hey, what you need to do is you need to get your custody order updated even further, even though he's out of country, and then get it translated into Greek. That was like, I'm going to say $1,000 on a $10 an hour budget. And who does that? I knew plenty of Greek people, but nobody to be able to do it, that it would count in court, forensic, the ability to do that forensically. So just those were some of the things. But then when I finally got it done, the State Department doubled back and said, hey, now there's nothing we can do. We're just a waiting game a little bit. Just cooperate with local law enforcement. So I did, and eventually a warrant was issued for my former husband's arrest. And then the State Department doubled back and said, why did you do this? You will never get your children out of that country now. There's no way you're going to get your kids out of Greece because you have done this. It's supposed to be a friendly conversation to get the kids back, not something that threatens to have him arrested. So those were just a few of the fun highlights of dealing with all these different government agencies. At the heart of it all were two little girls who were living the very sentence out that I was supposed to have, which is, if I can't have you, no one else will. So when I dared to leave and dared to get stronger and dared to become more independent, the punishment went to the girls. It was as though, and it still is, as though our kids are kind of like little voodoo dolls for us, right? If they're hurting, we are devastated. And I think he knew that it was more painful to have the kids hurt in the way that they were than to die for me. It was so terrifying to have my kids. I didn't know, how were they being treated? Were they able to go to school? What if they stepped out in traffic? What if one of them became ill and I wasn't there to take care of them? What would become of them? Would I see them again? When this occurred in my life, more than half of the children in the United States who left country due to a parental abduction never returned. So the return rate was pretty low and my hopes were pretty high. I knew that I needed to right the wrong. And I feel to this day, some responsibility, of course, for choosing a partner that had this in him. I never did the work that I should have done as a young person, to when I had good intentions about wanting to have a family and to do different than my family of origin. I never gave it any thought except for, I've decided that I'm going to do better. I will make it so. Boom. And my kids really lived the consequences. What was so cool, what was so exciting was that I had a number of people even though I had no family of origin who could help at that point or who would have. Um, and some of that has changed, but I came from a really abusive family. So um, in my corner, I had a number of resiliency factors, really some buffers. And some of that was, first of all, I lived in the state of Alaska pre-internet, thank goodness. And, for those of you who are young, there was a time when people wrote hand letters out and mailed them with a stamp. And when we spoke to each other instead of at each other, and, there was no like or anything like that, it was a grassroots movement. I didn't sleep the night of when I found out my kids were kidnapped. Went straight to work the next day, didn't hesitate, just went right on in, because there's where I knew stability. And told my boss what had happened, and people really rallied. I mean, I had great coworkers who are still my friends from all those years ago, but they cared and they wanted to be a part of the solution. Alaskans, this is not true today, but Alaskans, we were always behind the times. We were like a big little town, back in the day when this happened to our family. So if you were from Alaska, there's some truth to it now in Village, Alaska, but if something bad happens to you, people rally for you in a way that they wouldn't anywhere else. We need each other to survive. It's cold out there and it's isolating and the elements are bitter. And so people really did show up for one another. So eventually, when I had such trouble with the original police detective, I did go to the news media. And from there, things started changing. It was a Mother's Day newspaper article that came out on Mother's Day of 1994, where my story was spotlighted. And I can't even tell you how amazing the response was. Sometimes, you get your wackadoos, some people pretending they had the kids at their house or this or that, there are always those outliers, but for the most part, people were amazing. What can we do to help? Do we need to donate money somewhere? Do we need to have a fundraiser? I'm so sorry this happened to you. Community. In a time where I was feeling isolated, there was community. It took 2 solid years to be able to finally get my daughters, even to see them, 2 years. So the first year, when Greece recognized and enforced my custody order, I had to hire attorneys in Greece and a private investigator. Then the attorneys went on strike in Greece. If you've ever been to Greece, which is a beautiful country, and I highly recommend that you do so, it's a wonderful place, but there's never a shortage of going on strike. I mean, literally, they go on strike for everything. So one time when I was looking for my kids in Greece, I was with an attorney and we passed by an orphanage and people were holding picket signs. And my attorney said, "What are they looking for, parents?" So, I mean, the attorneys went on strike, everything was delayed, courts were closed. So we had those things happen. Short cliff notes, I was arrested at one point in Greece. But before that, there were even people there that said, "This is a travesty, what has happened. How can we help?" And, they're Greek nationals. They had nothing to gain by helping, but they wanted to right this wrong. And it's something that I think Lifetime did a great job of showing. There were amazing people there. So 2 years later, 2 trips later, a little over that, I finally see my daughters and they no longer speak my language, nothing. And they were not as excited to see me as I would have hoped. At first, one of them looked so excited, and then it was filled with horror and she turned pale. They had been told, of course, that I died and had been living in hiding and weren't attending school regularly whatsoever because of that. And it was very, very, very difficult. We had a long series of hearings before I could return with my children. And one way that the movie, which probably you haven't seen, but for those of you who have, one way the movie departs from real life, because they have to squash things to make it fit in 90 minutes. There was no ruling from the bench when I finally got to court to argue our custody order with all of my attorneys and my Greek friends and my kids and my former husband, his family. It took weeks before the judge would finally rule on my custody. And the court ruled finally against me and said, it doesn't matter how your children got to Greece at some point. They've been here 2 years. Too bad, so sad. You can try this again next year. And at that point, this is the point that's missing. The kids and I did eventually make our way through Turkey by boat and then back home to America, where we fought in federal court to get everything sealed back up. If I thought dealing with foreign governments was difficult, if I thought that not having my children and going through all of the financial upheaval, we were financially ruined. If I thought that was hard, it was nothing like parenting two traumatized children. And again, when we returned home, the message was, thank God they're so young. They'll never remember it when they get older. It's, whew, you are so lucky. And I needed to believe that. I wanted to believe that. And I insisted that my kids not come home and everyone feels sorry for them and people have no expectations for them, because I'm old school generation. And I felt like, hey girls, a lot of people have donated to our plight in a sense. And aren't you lucky? You're home, you got a lot of toys, you have this townhouse that I bought, and life goes on. Here you are back in America with great schooling. Let's get to it. And, I certainly got them therapy. I, right away put them into therapy. We could not get health insurance. No one would insure those little girls at the time because I made too much money by then to get public help. This was pre-Obamacare, but I didn't make enough money to, even if I could get private insurance, they said, we don't know what the girls have been exposed to for 2 years, so we're not going to insure them. So there was this long period where we had no insurance for them, but they did go to therapy. They did get back in school. And a year later, you would have never known that these two little girls had gone through anything like it. They had no accent, even though those were adorable accents. They did really well in school. They had friends in sports, and we were in the game. We were back in the game. I wanted the girls, looking back, I did not mean to do this to them, but I wanted their lives to be proof that the people who did invest in us emotionally, financially, all of it, I wanted them to feel proud of what they had done, which is so messed up. But it was like they were performing monkeys, like, hey, look, the girls made the honor roll again. Look at that. They're in soccer. I wanted them to be the model citizens because so many people had helped us. And I wanted them to have certainly a great future, but I felt indebted to the people that helped us. Never had wanted to be constantly reliant on other people's support. That was never part of my end game, but here it was. And I wanted people to feel really, really proud of what they had helped us accomplish. So the kids did make honor roll, and they were amazing in sports, and they were wonderful. And, I went to graduate school. I had a paper route and a full-time job, and I still made sure that I cooked and that the kids went to sports, and I was, single soul supporting parent. And in hindsight, some of that stuff could have waited or wasn't necessary. And I could have been I could have given myself more grace, and then I would have extended it to my kids. As it was, when they came home, that was when I started to lose it. All of the trauma of a lifetime really had come to roost for me as soon as we got back. And I started having flashbacks and, general signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. So a traumatized person, parenting traumatized little persons, it was not a pretty combination. It was not. I was no June Cleaver. Eventually, we got our paces. The girls were doing well. I got a job as a child abuse investigator. So that got the girls insurance, right? I worked for CPS locally in Alaska. I have to tell you, although it was super unpleasant, and I'm sure some of you have already worked there, it was such great training. There, I worked with other kids who had been exposed to domestic abuse and other things. I learned some things, of course, some of my old victims from working at the former domestic violence agency that I worked at were also the people responsible for the broken arms and injuries to their children. It wasn't just their abusive partners. And so, I mean, that makes sense, but it was still sobering. Some of those same kids had kind of followed me to the new work that I had. But dealing with kids who'd witnessed violence in the home, I could see some things. I saw that kids felt, and we know this, kids feel very responsible for what happens in the home. The age that my children were when they watched one parent that they loved so much, their father, abusing another parent that they loved so much, what do they feel? That ultimate betrayal. Like, that is so incredibly soul crushing for a child. And sometimes, depending on where it hits them developmentally, they feel responsible. A lot of times parents will scream and yell about children before it's followed up with violence or furniture being smashed, things being thrown. And what does that say to the kids? It's my fault. And if it's my fault, then it's my job to intervene and protect the parent. And so in child abuse investigations, we would have to intervene with teenage boys who would get hurt or who would become very volatile with the parent who was abusing their other parent, or the boyfriend or girlfriend who was abusing their other parent. I one time as a social worker was lost, which is kind of how I live my life. I'm terrible with directions, but I had a state car and I was looking for this home where I was going to do a non-emergency visit. The offender was in prison by now, or not prison, but in jail. And so it was deemed to be safe enough for me to go by myself. And so I don't know how you do it here, but we didn't have that much help. And so I drove out by myself to this prearranged appointment, which was pretty unusual, and went to this home. But there was these two little boys jumping up and down on the stairs, waving at me. They could see that I was lost, and they were little, but they could not wait to see me, like I was their rich aunt or something. And so I parked the state vehicle and go in to do the investigation one by one. But what was so interesting to me was these boys they knew what they were excited about. They knew I couldn't make a long-term huge difference. Their mom would very likely take this person back as soon as no one was watching and he was out of jail. And they'd been through it before with another partner, but they wanted to tell me their story. They wanted to not keep the secret that parents tell children to keep secrets on. They wanted to be able to show me that behind the painting on the wall was a punch mark with hair flowing out of it. There were rust-colored stains on the carpet, blood stains. There were things that told their story. And they didn't want to keep it a secret, and they wanted to unpack that. And I just thought, oh, that was amazing. That was absolutely amazing to see. Kids feel responsible. Kids feel like they need to protect. Kids then are told they need to keep it a secret. And of course, some of the kids are taken out of school to keep family secrets, so they lose their education. Sometimes they can't concentrate in school anyway because they're worried about what's going on at home. So for 18 long months, just 18 months, I worked as a child protective investigator, but it was one of the best trainings that I could ever have. Eventually, I went to work I did my internship for my graduate degree with sex offenders in the adult system for about 18 months, but then went to work in the juvenile probation system. Meanwhile, my kids were teenagers, kind of those awkward ages, and then getting older and older. And I'm thinking everything should be just fine. We've got a stable home. I've got a stable job. They've got great school. I didn't expect that as they got older, that trauma would start to express itself, and that my kids would need to let some of it out. And so, some of it is not that unusual for kids, I guess, but there was drug experimentation for me that was like, And one of my daughters, when we were out Christmas shopping together, she was 13 years old at this point, 13 years old, she shoplifted while we were all together. I was actually in a different section because they were allegedly shopping for me. But it was so startling because as a parent, I thought, today shoplifting, tomorrow armed robbery. I mean, I didn't know where this was going. And so I always had an overreaction. I will say, I mean, want to react and be serious, but I had always an overreaction of just thinking, oh my gosh, the world is going to end. We had to leave town to go to our probation meeting when she did her shoplift because I was supervising in the local office. So we needed to go to a different town to do the original interview for her theft. It was a misdemeanor theft. And the probation officer started with the words, I know you have a very good childhood. You have a mom that is working in the system, and there are kids who come in here who don't even know their parents, and they've been through some things. And you are very fortunate. I don't think you even know how fortunate you are. And I know this person was meaning to be, he was also a supervisor. I know he was meaning to be very helpful. But whoa, what a way for motivational interviewing, because it was lecturing before even listening. And the truth is, she'd had a really rough time. I didn't expect that when my daughter reached the age of going to college, which both my kids got scholarships for at least a good part of it, when my oldest daughter went away to college in Washington State for school she wanted to go to, I'd taken her to see it. I could not wait to be, honestly, I couldn't wait to be an empty nester. I would be like 42 when they were both gone. Thought, I was going to be hitting easy street, finally, And that sounds mean, but truthfully, I'd been through it and I needed some time to breathe. So we get her situated in college. And that was the first time she was forced to be separated from me again. And everything, it seemed like all the work we had done just went out the window. By the time I got back to Alaska, she'd started the process of having a mental health break, eventually a psychotic break. And once that happened, we would never, ever experience life the same. It was as though she was the very age that when she was kidnapped. And that promise of, your kids are so lucky, that happened when they were young and they'll never know. And life's going to go on, just get them therapy, this, that. It just wasn't true. It just was not true. I'd been working with traumatized children in our system and parenting traumatized children. And now as a trauma-informed trainer and adverse childhood experiences trainer, in 2013, I was really confronted. At that point, my 25-year-old daughter was still living at home. She couldn't live on her own for a series of years because she was very low functioning, hospitalized briefly, in mental health services, on the right medications, and still could not cope on her own, couldn't remember to shower, couldn't remember to eat appropriately, couldn't be trusted to not set the house on fire. It was like leaving a 6-year-old at home and then going off to work. So it took a lot of therapy, coaching for me, parenting coaching, because when your kid's going through something, you need extra support for yourself to be able to deal with what the mess is. But it eventually really started to come together. That's where my book begins and where it ends. I needed to know, I finally did learn, trauma does roost in our bodies. And for us working with traumatized children, and so many of our kids have been through toxic traumas, not just trauma, not just like, a divorce or, my pet died, which by the way, of course, can be horrible, or, something like that. We went through COVID. Yeah, that's bad. But a toxic trauma, and too many of them in childhood, it lands differently, and it can absolutely be a precursor to horrible mental health problems, substance abuse problems, shorter life expectancy, array of behavioral issues. And what my kids didn't need for me to do was try to love them up with old school methods. What they needed was for me to listen and to get them support, not be lenient. I don't mean that. I do not mean not have good expectations for them, but perhaps modify my approach as they were starting to show signs of huge wear and tear. They had a lot and have a lot of emotional scar tissue that I just did not see. I did not know how bad things would be for them. And I didn't ever expect this tornado heading toward me of things that had been kind of locked away in the vault that were just then expressed. And today, and I will stop in a second so we can have some question and answer before we break. Today, both of the kids have had various interventions. One has a lot of physical health issues that absolutely relate to the period of time in Greece and growing up in a lot of trauma. We know that kids who are raised with the whole bunch, there are things that they're more likely to have, like obesity can be one, certainly asthma. My daughter has fibromyalgia. My yoga attending, gluten-free, thin as a rail daughter went to the doctor and he said, it sounds like fibromyalgia. But you know what? And he actually said this is not, nice guy. He did not mean to be rude, but he said to her, but I know you don't have fibromyalgia because fibromyalgia is for fat, dumpy, middle-aged rape victims. That's more likely what I'm going to see when I'm doing a fibromyalgia diagnosis. And you don't have any of that. And then she was like early 20s. He's like, never mind. You absolutely have fibromyalgia. And that's just one of the many autoimmune problems she has. Autoimmune being when the body fights itself and it feels like that's domestic violence that's still unexpressed. It's my oldest daughter that still struggles with anxiety and huge mental health concerns. And she eventually moved out on her own in her 30s now. She got her degree a few years ago, 2019, just as we were ready to have a party celebrating her graduating college, the pandemic came. But we just got back from a trip celebrating her accomplishment, and she has worked very effectively with juveniles and adults experiencing cognitive or spectrum issues of being on the autism spectrum. She's done a great job of working with individuals with disabilities, and still she struggles some. But what she has taught me, what my other daughter has taught me, is that those old school interventions were not particularly effective, that I employed with them as a parent, and that the body really does, as Bessel van der Kolk says, the body really does keep the score, and unexpressed and sometimes unpacked trauma, even if you've gone to therapy, there are things that sometimes work their way out or that need to, or a person gets frozen in them. So I'm excited to say that they are doing as well as can be expected today, even better. And yet I would be lying to say that we got off the plane to America, life wrapped up in a bow, and it was like happily ever after. It wasn't so simple. It was shocking as a probation supervisor to start getting retrained on how to work with kids, because I had some deep regrets about how I talked to other kids as well. And so we'll talk about that in the next in the next time after our break. But I want to give you time for question answers if you have any, or rather questions if you have any. And by the way, if anyone likes hardbacks, my paperback is sold out, which is awesome, online, but it will be back. Regular pricing should be $17.95 within a week or so, just if you prefer paperback, but I have audiobook as well as digital. Now, does anyone have questions about our experience? There's really nothing you can't ask, because I do these presentations a lot. It's my new job now, part of it. Ask anything you like. It's not going to hurt my feelings, and I have a decent sense of humor. So feel free. Please feel free. And if not, we can just take a break.
So if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself to ask any questions, you're more than welcome to. I am watching the chat box here, so pop it in there, or just give me a shout out.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you, Marissa. Let me show you. The book is called Pieces of Me, Rescuing My Kidnapped Daughters. So here it is. This is what it looks like. I show you this because when you order any book, and I didn't know this when I first wrote a book, but when you write a book, everyone else has taken titles. So you're always going to have 10 books with the same title. It's always the subtitle that is different. So I just wanted you to see the image. There are like 10 different books and a song by Ashley Simpson called Pieces of Me. So rather than you ending up with that, I just wanted you to know. If you order Pieces of Me and you get a song, it's not it. Thank you for asking. Hey, and you can ask about the book to movie process too, while we're just doing the informal chat before your break, because that was fun. You know, some things have to change when a book becomes a movie, but it really was so shocking. And that a book from an unagented author could become a movie. I was like, yay, so excited. Again, not the sign of a happy life. It's happy now, but Lifetime doesn't do a whole lot of movies on people who had really great childhoods. So you may have noticed this, but I think they did a beautiful job in the movie. They didn't make it simple and they didn't make it exploitive. I think one thing I don't like in true stories sometimes is sort of a trauma. It's like people get a high off of trauma and violence when they're watching television, and they didn't do that. And I was really very grateful. Anyone? Are you all too shy? We will talk more about the things that do and don't work, talking to kids who've experienced domestic violence, whether it was when they were tiny or when they're teenagers, because the signs that they show sometimes mimic ADHD. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for saying that. Your journey through this has been amazing. Do you know one of the things that helped me heal, even though I had a great therapist, series of them, and great community, was deciding to go to work and the very system that I felt like may have failed me. That was super healing, because a lot of the things that I took as being very personal, when you work for government and you've managed to fail some families yourself, which, hey, sign me up, I did. Whether it's through bureaucracy, wait lists, wrong, policy protocol changing, whatever it is, mistakes, you realize, oh, there's always more need than there are resources. And that can create some of the problems that I might have taken as being very personal. Also, I got the awesome opportunity of working with our local police department. I would have limped along maybe a grudge, after some of the things I went through. Not only did I have a detective who didn't want to help, but her coworker in the same crimes against children unit said he would help me understand what was going on in the background. But first, he was looking to score and hang out privately together. And he was married. Not that that would have changed anything, but that's like, it was just one of those awful betrayals. But there were so many amazing police officers I worked with for 20 years. All of those things, it really helped staying in the field. It helped add that balance and perspective that helped the book, really. And eventually apologizing to my kids for the messes that I've made. That was important. That was really important. The more I learned, the more I could go back and say, here's what I thought I was doing. Here's what I did. And I'm so, just being real accountable to them. I did the best that I could, but it wasn't fair to them to say, I did my best, sorry. And, it's really helped. It's been delightful. Should we take a break now, do you think? We can, if you like to, or I can keep nattering along. I love to natter.
Well, I think that everyone, my phone has been going off like crazy. Everyone has loved your background and what you shared with us. Even got a few icons sent to me.
Thank you.
Think if we want to pause and take a little short 5 to 10 minute break just to let everything sink in with everybody, and then we'll come back, you want to come back 10:15 and then
yes, let's do it. 10:15. Thank you. Should I sign out?
Oh, no, you can keep.
Just leave it.
Yeah,
okay.
Just leave it right there. You can stop your video right there. That way you can get up and stretch your legs. Do your
Perfect.
yoga.
Yes. If you hear things breaking, you know I'm trying yoga. I'll be back in 10. Thank you so much. See you all.
Yeah, Will told me he was gonna be up there today.
Yeah, he told me that too. No, Carol told me that. Carol told me Will is the lawyer. That's how I knew
Well, I
that.
seen Will, he told me he seen me on Friday.
I missed this.
Hey, Will, it's Jason. We're at juvenile court, so they're playing inmates over. At juvenile court, so. Yes, sir.
Oh, Wilbur.
Bet you I missed half of this. Dang
Oh, I was just,
it.
What you
I
doing,
was supposed to log into this an hour ago. Wait, I have another meeting too. What's this one?
I'm good. You sure you're good?
Oh,
Friday.
Yeah,
Hey, why don't you tell
it
Jason?
seems like I'm running.
Well, now you have to.
Bent over about 8:15 and ripped my blue jeans in the back all the way down. Had to go home and change. I'm gonna blame it on the washer and dryer
That's right. That's right.
Do you want to tell him why you were in that situation?
because I dropped an ink pen.
No,
That piece of paper.
because he was threatening to be shredding my homework. And then he said paper, like that it was a blank piece of paper, I'm assuming, and he bent over to pick it up. And it was karma, is what it was.
Forgot this conference is an hour ahead. I missed an hour of it. Yeah,
What
I'm
are they doing?
He likes the
freaking.
shine down version.
Well, they're doing this.
I like them both. Shine down version. Sorry.
Recording in
I'm
progress.
just saying. I mean, the old days. And we've got.
Good morning.
So we are saying our good morning and introductions.
Oh, I'm Patricia Miller, Stewart County Representative.
No, I'm not sure. I see an AF 01054.
Oh,
Are you on two different
That's
meetings?
me.
yeah,
That's Dana.
Wow.
they were both that
Oh,
in the morning.
okay. Sorry.
Patricia Miller, you may want to mute your.
And last but
This
not
has been a
least,
week
our
of
leader,
meetings.
Susan
All week.
Coe.
I've done Trends Review
Good
Board.
morning,
When did I do
everyone.
that?
So glad you're here
Wednesday?
today. I'm Susan Coe,
Then
Financial
yesterday I
Planner.
did this mental health thing. And today I'm the representative for the TCCY for our county.
Tuka?
And then I'm doing a training.
Yes. Okay.
And then we have court.
And we have
And I
quorum.
missed a freaking hour of it. I'm so mad.
Patricia Miller.
Want to kick us off, or do you want to start with the January minutes?
No, here.
Let's start with the January minutes.
Yes.
Has everyone had a chance to look at our January minutes?
We'll do supplements.
We did.
Can everyone please mute?
And that person is not here.
Yeah, they mail all that to
Error,
them.
Rebecca, exactly. Kathy E was missing, so we are gonna put an E in Kathy's name all over the post. But other than that, does anyone have any, thing that they saw that needs to be changed?
No,
Or just
we're not talking
something
about the
that they-
draft, I'm still crying.
Hey, why don't you tell Judge what happened to you this morning?
Oh.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Titans trade
And
Ajax.
three, that was Rebecca.
Sorry, I'm on two meetings.
Who was
Yeah.
second?
I'm on two meetings.
Okay.
She's actually
Same time.
participating in three.
Can everyone please put
And they're in
yourself
here.
on mute?
Hey, ask Gary what
Hey,
happened.
vote
This
for
is
that.
because I say yes to
Any
things.
discussion? Okay, those passed, we ready to approve.
You can't.
And I just want to thank Ellen for taking our minutes last time. Yes.
So, yeah.
And she is, she's gonna try to join us. She had another event. She's gonna be able to join. Next we have. Do you want me to share?
Why do you call you a weak man?
Yeah, I think I can. Can you see it?
Why did he call him a weak man?
Okay.
Because he uses some battery.
Joey has one of those big.
Excuse me. Hello.
Okay, so
Hello.
quarterly treasury report.
Hello.
January.
Please mute our phones.
So at the beginning
We're
of.
doing a board meeting. I'm the representative for Stewart County.
Hello.
TCCY.
Why would you help them?
They give us money, $9,000 for your salary.
No, you said you said to DC.
Both too. 9,000 from TCCY and 14,607 from DC.
So we ended with a balance. of
And they give us they give me 12 books. You know how much those books cost?
In,
Yeah, they do nothing for children.
in February, which was our beginning balance for that period.
Sometimes you just have to do things.
March 15th. And we did get $815 of membership dues from February to March. Again, no withdrawal.
Okay, everyone. We are back from our short break here. We are going to start on part 2 with Miss Lizbeth Meredith. The link to her book and the link to the Lifetime movie is in the chat. Feel free to shoot anyone in my office an email, and we'll be more than happy to send you the links on email should you not be able to see it or click it. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to Ms. Meredith for part 2.
And thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. I thank you so much. And also just know that I'm at lameredith.com online if someone wants to reach out. And or I podcast at Persistence U podcast. U is in university, so people can hear once a week there on Wednesdays. So great ways to connect. And it's so fun to have a Tennessee connection. I got to present recently at the Tennessee Fitness Spa on writing memoir and book to movie, and that was so much fun. So I'm feeling like a real Tennessean. It's a good thing. It's a big change from Alaska, I will just say. So having talked about my own personal experience of parenting and just a little bit about working with DJJ, I want to recognize first off that today's meeting here is a lot about court improvements. I know that that's a theme. And so I want you to please remind me of just a couple of things, if I don't get to it a little bit later, that can help as your intervention with kids who've been exposed to violence when dealing with court and court improvements, because you have a lot of influence in what happens in juveniles' lives, and we want things to go well and for people not to be surprised. I think that's one of the main things, is we want people not to be super surprised with recommendations and with different interventions that we use in our day-to-day work life. So I mentioned before that in 2013, I was one of a number of people trained to be trauma-informed care trainers. And I loved that training, I really did, and train on the adverse childhood experiences study. And for those of you, especially those who are newer in the field, those were really transformational trainings that we received, because it really, really, really speaks to the fact that when we're dealing with juveniles and with adults, that we reach out to them in a way that says, what happened to you, rather than what is wrong with you. Even though we might naturally think that quietly, we wouldn't necessarily say it out loud. But really, it teaches us to think differently about the people we're working with, using universal precautions. We don't have to have a juvenile tell us, hey, I was sexually abused from age 2 to 6. Because sometimes the juveniles themselves won't even remember such things, or age 2 to 3 or whatever. But we use universal precautions with our compassion and with our approach to kids. And we really speak to them in a way that reflects, I care to know what happened to you, rather than what's wrong with you. For just a quick update, and you may already know it, but I don't think it'll hurt to hear it again. Let me put on my readers. Just, when we're talking about trauma and youth and what gives kids a really high trauma score, just 1 second, please. Some of the things that we're talking about are things such as kids who've had a parent die when they were very, very little, or a really volatile divorce can be, excuse me, I just pulled up my notes and then they were gone. Okay. Physical abuse, of course, we know that. Sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, being parented by a parent with mental illness, a divorce, especially if it goes poorly. We know some people manage divorce quite well. Not a lot of our DJJ parents are necessarily in that category, but maybe you've had some, and that's beautiful. If it's a divorce where kids feel like they have to choose sides, where they can only see one parent, not the other parent, where they're constantly hearing nastiness about one parent from the other, all of those things that can really be detrimental. If they're parented by parents who have active substance abuse problems. Those are some of the worst adverse childhood experiences that give kids what we call the high ACE score. We did these trainings around the state. I trained correctional officers, juvenile justice officers, probation officers, all of the folks on trauma-informed care and ACEs. The problem is not necessarily with the information, but the problem became with the varied interpretation of what to do with the information. The curriculum that we taught at the time gave a lengthy explanation on how kids' brains work, which you probably have already heard, but never hurts repeating, that kids aren't completely done developing in their brain until now we know the late 20s, not even the early 20s, but the late 20s, that the decision-making part of the brain is the last thing to finally develop. You know that. You didn't even need research to tell you because you're dealing with it. And we know that, and that's just for all kids. That's not for kids who've witnessed abuse or have high ACE scores. That's just for all kids, that their brains develop later than ours. They're not like small adults. Doesn't help to treat them like small adults because they're not comprehending everything. If they've experienced a lot of emotional trauma, those toxic traumas we just read off on, then their ability to modulate their emotions and to read your emotions are compromised. Sometimes they get stuck in trauma and they are developmentally stunted. When I taught the curriculum, we didn't know what the goal was of teaching the curriculum. Like, okay, I know about all these bad things, now what? We're really ideally supposed to help these kids developmentally progress and not be stuck any longer. We do that by getting them the services that they need, or when we can't do that because it's caught up in legal wrangling, right, with public defenders and prosecutors and all of that, we can't do some of the services we would like to do, but we certainly can do a lot in how we manage our day-to-day work life. And so our relationships with kids become very critical. We develop a trusting professional relationship with them, professional, not a friendship, by no means a peer relationship, but we develop a care about them. They understand that when we employ consequences, it's because, first of all, we have protocols and laws that we deal with, but it is actually for their own good. And we don't do it apologetically whatsoever, but we might explain our different procedures, our protocols, our rules, and help them understand. And I think that was a big part of teaching trauma-informed care and ACEs. When you have kids who've experienced so many things, like a number of our kids have seen their parents commit suicide. They haven't just had a parent who died by suicide. They've seen the parent or found the parent afterward, or a parent who's overdosed. They're missing siblings. They may have been kidnapped by one parent from another, like I was. They've gone through a lot of really hard things. Trauma-informed care, we are able to respect that they are a survivor, that alone is a strength, that they are employing different ways of survival and adaptations. They have some adaptive behaviors. We call them manipulative behaviors at times, but sometimes those are strengths that have helped them. Even using substances has been something that may have helped them survive in the past. We're not going to agree with that. We're not going to give that a thumbs up. We're just going to acknowledge that they've used some adaptations in the past that have helped them survive. And we respect that they have. And now we're going to help them get healthier and move along in their developmental process. We see them as capable, but we see them as maybe needing to learn a little bit differently or needing to understand the rules and what comes next in a way that some of our other kids don't. So kids who've experienced a lot of abuse in the home, their brains are on that stress response. Even one of my daughters, that's some of her health issues. She's never gotten over her little brain is still telling her danger, danger, danger. And if somebody gives her feedback, she knows that I do these talks. So in case you're wondering, I try not to invade their privacy without getting permission first, but she has a 0 to 10 response like some of our kids do, where her cortisol levels and her brain are saying, survive, survive, the world is out to kill you. You're in danger, you're in danger. And that response still happens in her 30s at times when someone's giving her feedback that to her feels threatening. What a person may be saying is, you know, you did a really good job on this, but this part of your work right here doesn't work. We're going to need to change this response of yours or this work adaptation. And what she hears is, you're a failure, you're going to get fired. And she's in her 30s and has lots of therapy. So some of our kids, when they see you, they see your expressions, they read them differently, and they have a very different response. It's like their body, it's like they're walking by a fire alarm, right? And maybe in the past, that fire alarm needed to be pulled. Well, now just them walking beside the fire alarm goes off in their very presence. It's kind of like that with their little brains. Like they feel at times that they're still in danger, and their response, even if they have liked you before, even if you had a decent rapport, sometimes their alarm goes off and it goes from 0 to 10. You didn't see it coming. And it's very easy when you've been an empathetic and a worker in juvenile justice who's tried very hard to have compassion and empathy for people. It could be very personal when this kid goes off, frankly, starts tearing the room up or gets physical or whatever. And that's normal if you feel like that's personal and you feel a sense of betrayal. However, just keep in mind that the reason we teach trauma-informed care and the adverse childhood experiences study is so that workers, one of the great reasons is so that we don't take their issues personally as much. They take things personally because they're kids. We are the professionals, and the more we understand about them, the more ideally we should be able to have a little bit of removal and detachment from their responses, which is not to say that we get comfortable feeling sorry for kids and feeling bad and empathetic and writhing in pain for what they've gone through. I don't want to joke about that because, I mean, some of us are really empathetic and whatever happens to other people really gets us. The interpretation of trauma-informed care and getting all the information we have has sometimes led to people feeling like, I want to be the one that helps them heal and reach their full potential in the short time that we have them at DJJ. And I worked and coached probation officers who felt like this horrible stuff that happened to the kid means I should be their confidant, their cheerleader, and their best friend. And I will tell you that that has only worked to create dangerous, dangerous responses in Division of Juvenile Justice staff. We had one facility in our state where it was a smaller facility. People felt real comfortable with the kids. They knew all of the kids and their backgrounds because now we have so many different bits of information that we receive about kids entering our system. So they got to know the kids. They've done motivational interviewing with the juveniles. They felt real comfortable. And one night, as they're sitting, it's only like, I'm going to say 15 or less kids in this facility at the time. They were having game night, nothing wrong with that. But everyone, and I mean the staff, felt super relaxed around the kids because of that rapport and relationship. So instead of being a little bit on guard because, hey, I'm at work with people who've experienced trauma and who, because of that, are more likely to be aggressive, even if they've gotten a lot of interventions and support, they still can be triggered, or they still can have really, really big criminal thinking errors, you know, not a different way to put it. So they got super relaxed on game night, not realizing that a few of the kids had created an escape plan that included fighting to the death until they got out. And so these kids had been communicating. They knew game night was coming. Nothing wrong with them knowing game night was coming. What was sad was that staff had that sort of relaxed shoulder. This is so much fun. Here with my buddies, we're all enjoying game night. And it ended in a bloody, bloody, bloody mess. Staff was taken to the hospital. Some of the other kids who weren't involved with the planning were also then put at risk. They tried to help. They had to be locked into their cells. It was a nightmare that changed lives, and not in a positive way. It's really important as we get great information about trauma-informed care and how to work with kids who've been through so much, that we embrace the information. Trauma-informed care and the Adverse Childhood Experiences study specifically, this is based on a long time study that comes from the Kaiser Permanente researchers. This is one of the few studies in my 57 years of life where you can literally look at cause and effect. This isn't like, hey, I think that early traumas may impact life expectancy. Hey, I think that these certain things that happen might affect, asthma, heart disease, all of these different things. No, when you look at the Adverse Childhood Experiences study and how long it happened for, how many people were interviewed, what the results were, this is cause and effect. I can say it with absolute confidence on that part. But that doesn't mean that we get that information and that we get relaxed with it and that we become kids' buddies. One of the most important things dealing with traumatized kids is that they know what to expect, that they understand people's role. I would tell juveniles, and I at least did some things right even from the start, but tell the juveniles, my role is exactly this. You can expect this intervention from me. I'd like to support your efforts to change. I'm hoping, I will go by your motivation, but I want to support your efforts to change. If I'm going to be in touch with your victim when that was relevant. Not all crimes have them, but I'll be in touch with victims, and I'm going to be checking on different collateral information to make sure what you tell me is true. But I will support your efforts to change. And if you do not comply with, these are the rules here, let's go through them slowly. We'll have to do it a lot because kids' brains don't retain that much. They really don't, especially if they're going through the crisis of the criminal justice system. They need to be reminded constantly. But you are agreeing to these things if you have the privilege of being out in the community. And if you violate some of these, here's what you can expect from me. That's very important in working with kids who've experienced trauma. Clear roles. We are never friends. We are never peers. That doesn't mean I don't care about kids. Doesn't mean that there aren't some that I like better than others. That makes us human. They should not know it by my behavior. Kids on the unit should not know who someone's favorite is and who's the groomy kid and who the least favorites are, if at all possible. But they should know what they can expect from me. The same way when we're creating court recommendations for those of you who do this, even if you go to court with kids, you're one of the officers that helps make it successful by kids going to court. Kids need to know exactly what the expectations are for good court productive behaviors. Hey kid, if you want to do yourself a favor, super helpful for you to follow these instructions. Behave like this in court, pretend that you're in church, sit up straight. Yes, Your Honor, no, Your Honor. Do not wear a hat, do not swear, do not hit anything. Help them know how to succeed, even if they won't, even if you're pretty sure that they're not going to follow your directions. Letting kids know what to expect, certainly, especially with kids from domestic abuse. They're from homes where they've never known what to expect. When they go home, will there be both parents? When they go home, is it going to be the honeymoon period in domestic violence where everyone's happy again and compliments, and maybe their new, maybe the abused parent has new presents, or maybe there are flowers or apologies or great behaviors before the tension builds again. There's this constant cycle of domestic abuse that happens. Tensions building, explosion, honeymoon period. Everyone's happy. No one talks about the bad things that happen. Don't tell anyone at school. Don't tell your correctional officer. Don't tell your probation officer. And then on and on. Cycle of abuse. So when kids can find out what you expect of them, even if they don't have the capacity or the want to do right, it's better off. When we're writing reports about teenagers or younger, when we're writing reports about kids who are about to go to court for maybe sentencing or any other thing, we want to not surprise them or their parents. That's one of the most trauma-informed, the best rule of trauma-informed care is don't surprise people by all means. If you are writing a parent's bad behaviors from the past or recent future, we used to have a 5-year rule. I don't know how Tennessee does it, but really a lot of the behaviors of the past for a parent, if they're on probation or in the justice system, we would report some of the things if they were relevant in the child's report, simply because those are the third-party custodians, the parents are. And if the parent is wrapped up in criminal or child protective behaviors right now or in the recent future, court needs to know about that. And so we had a rule where we would write about it. The best thing you can do is let the parent know from the beginning during an investigation period before you go to court, hey, let you know, here's some of the things I'm going to be looking at when we go to court. And so I'll be looking at maybe your history, both parents' history, look at the family's history together. I'll be looking for strengths, what's helped, what's improved, and looking at what else is going on, because I have to assure the community that you're the person that should be or should not be supervising your child while they're on conditions. It's easy when parents are so abusive to get caught up in wanting to hate that parent. As a juvenile justice professional, I think it's normal in some of the situations to quietly think, of course the kid is like this. Look what they came from, which is normal, but it is far different to run the parent down in front of the juvenile. So we just want to keep to the facts. So if I have a parent that is constantly enabling a child and doesn't hold the child accountable, I'm not necessarily going to be calling them out as an enabler, this, that, and the other thing in front of the courts. Of course, that's up to your supervisors. But what I would do is show the facts. The juvenile went missing on this date. I contacted the parent on this date to report it. They said they had no idea where their child was. I called back 2 days later, still reporting that they have no idea where their child is, who is now on a warrant. And yet police found their child there half an hour later, and the parent never reported that their child had shown up home. Those are better facts only things than running the parent down entirely by opinion, because calling people things like, an addict, felon, or whatever, can be triggering for the child. Just use the facts. I'm not saying hide any of it. I'm just saying tell the juvenile and the parent when possible. A lot of our parents we couldn't get a hold of before court, or they weren't involved or whatever, but trying not to surprise someone with what you're about to say in court, and making sure, even though it's factual, it can be very triggering for a juvenile. Just let them know, these are the things I'm going to go over. Here's why. All right. You're not apologizing for the information, but you're not going to run the kid down or the parent down. You're going to express what actually happened. And if they don't like the consequences of their conduct, that's a different world. But it's not us dogpiling on how bad their parent is, because even if the juvenile knows their parent is horrifying, and some of them, of course, know that. Some go back and forth. It's still their parent. And so just respecting that they may have a loyalty, even when they've talked bad about their parent, that they may still have some loyalty is just good to know. If we can avoid surprising kids If we can let them know what the rules are, fantastic. Let them know in advance. Another court recommendation I used to make to my staff was, if a juvenile is coming to your facility and or a juvenile is on probation and they have broken the rules many times and been held accountable, or maybe you have let things slide and they haven't been, be accurate in what you tell them by phone or in your meeting. Never tell a juvenile, and this will sound like I'm splitting hairs, don't tell a juvenile, next time I see you, you're going to be in here for 30 days, or you're going to be locked up for 60 days, or a year, or 2 years, because we can't guarantee that. The court decides that, right? What I would always say is, you have been given this grace. The very next time you violate this part of the rules, or, you know, depending on what the crime is, this is what you can expect me to recommend. I'm not playing. I am not playing here. And so the juvenile knows that you are a person of your word. You're not going to feel sorry for them and having made some recommendations or told them what you were going to recommend in the past, and you're not going to back away from that. You're going to be consistent, but you're also going to be accurate. It was, you know, I had a couple of probation officers who like to scare kids, and we know scared straight stuff does not work. Frankly, if abuse and being scared straight would have worked, none of our kids would have ended up in the juvenile justice system, because a lot of them are from homes where they've experienced a lot of threats or physical punishments. That's not necessarily a great thing whatsoever. But I'd have staff who would say to kids, you know, I'm telling you, you even look cross-eyed while you're on conditions, and next time you're going to be here for 90 days. And then they'd go to court having arrested the juvenile, you know, on a violation, a legitimate violation that was a danger to self, others, or made the kid a flight risk. Go to court, the court lets kid out the next day. So that becomes a problem for the probation officer, because they feel like they've been injured by the court, which is not necessarily true, but it feels that way. But certainly they lose ground in front of the juvenile. It's best just to say, my recommendations will be this based on that. It may seem like that's a very small nuance, but again, it's being a person of your word, always knowing you are not a juvenile's friend. You may care about them. I used to tell staff in my trainings, if you ever get to the place where you say to yourself, even if you hear it in your thoughts, I'm the only person here who really cares about kids, I let the kid call me on off hours. You know, kid has my cell number and call me anytime. I let the kid call the unit all times of the day or night when they're out, and just to chit chat. You're in the danger zone, and these things close by arrest more than they should. We've had as many men and women arrested for inappropriate relationships with juveniles that didn't start with an intention to harm someone, I believe, but it can blur those boundaries. It really messes with a kid. They need to know that you're a professional. You're not in an equal playing field. You're not trying to lord your power and control over them, but you are there with the mission. And I always used to explain to kids at the beginning of our work together, I am certainly answering to you. You know, I care about what happened to you, but I'm also equally answering to victims of crime and the community, and of course your parents. I balance these things, and here's what you can expect of me. Nothing more, nothing less. And I will try super hard to be a person of my word that you can find some predictability in. Part of, again, the thing that we want to teach, I think, our staff, for all of us working with juveniles who are from homes that are challenging, is it's a shame that our grantors don't understand this. You know, we get dinged a lot financially on our outcomes. It's like we've been given kids that we're supposed to have magic fairy dust, and we wave that magic fairy dust, and bing, no more recidivism, no more crimes being committed. In reality, my daughter's experience and the experiences of any of us dealing with a lot of toxic traumas are that you're fortunate that you have training to help your efforts. And the thing that you can most pat yourself on the back for, don't wait for someone else to do it, is that you do your due diligence to be respectful, to be accountable, to be someone who models good professional behavior. and that you see the strengths in juveniles, even when they don't see it in themselves. You see their capacity, and you're willing to put the effort in, even though it often takes many, many years, and you will be long out of their lives before those little seeds that you've planted take root and blossom. But that doesn't mean your work wasn't amazing and fabulous all along. It was, and it is. And I would just say also that one of my great, great experiences working with juveniles was our director asked a couple of us to go, this will sound very strange, but our director asked a couple of us to go to prisons, halfway houses, and in the community sometimes when it was safe, and find adult offenders that we could talk to if they were willing, and ask them. These were kids that had been with us. They were our graduates, our DJJ alumni. Go find them and interview them on what worked back in the day when we saw them and what did not. What were the things that stuck with them and what did not? And I will tell you, that was a great experience. I love being in the thick of weird things, and certainly being locked into a small prison cell a couple of times to do these interviews was kind of fun. When I emerged alive, it was great. But these were kids in their mid to late 20s, so their brains had fully developed. They had nothing to lose or gain by talking to us, and they didn't have to. Not all of them did. So they're adults, in theory, legally they were adults, and got to ask, what did we do well, and what do you wish we would have done differently? One kid told me that hearing from probation staff, and this really stopped me in my tracks, but hearing from probation staff, look, I don't care what you do. I am going to get paid regardless. You could do whatever you like. My paycheck comes no matter what you do. So you do you, I will just respond accordingly. He said that was the last thing I needed to hear. I actually needed to hear that someone actually cared about how I progressed. I had plenty of people at home telling me I amounted to absolute zero. So hearing that from staff just absolutely hurt. Another kid told me, this was very interesting because we used to be so restrictive on, for example, kids coming into our facility, especially if they were institutionalized for a very serious crime, and how they made their bed as an example. And yet we didn't do much to teach them how to make their bed. And it's funny because most of us think, well, of course you know how to make a bed, right? You live in America, you have beds. Not all countries have them. You do. This kid told me that he had grown up in a home where there was no bed. He didn't have a mattress. There were lots of kids piled on the floor. That's just the way they grew up, in poverty. And there wasn't a bedtime and a breakfast time and meals on the table that didn't exist. And they didn't go to school much. And so he was learning to do these things that were expected of him. And one day he made his bed as well as he could. He thought, I've got this. I'm getting all my points today. And he said, what I didn't realize was a hair had fallen from my head onto the bed. And the juvenile justice officer came in and docked me points for that. And he said, that day I wanted to kill myself. I literally thought about how I could make it in because nothing was ever going to be good enough. And it was just a reminder. He wasn't, lying. He was just saying, remember, we have different lives. We come here from different experiences, and don't forget that. And it's not that there shouldn't be expectations, but I need to be tutored up and schooled onto what you expect exactly, because I don't come with the baseline that you're thinking I do. Other kids, young men and women, actually just practically hugged me. Like we were some of their best memories. And that's sad when you think about it, but it was very bittersweet for them. Like, oh my gosh, I wondered how you all were doing and really wanted to thank you for these particular things. And I loved mealtime, or I really cared when I worked with this officer who listened really well, talked to us, or when someone explained, hey, this is why this person with maybe a disability is being held less accountable or accountable differently on the unit than the others of you. That really mattered because I didn't understand the unfairness of it. So thank you for that. Thank you all for your efforts. I love what you're doing. And so it was really a neat experience. You know, we do great work, but we often don't see the difference we've made in persons' lives, in juveniles' lives. And while one could say these people were caught up in the system, some were on the out, you know, with minor crimes, some were in for homicide that I went to visit, they still have a chance. If there's still a breath in their life, there's still a chance they can make a contribution. And everything that you do, you are planting seeds. It's not easy work, but it matters. And I love the work that you do and that we have done so very much. And I think one of the main things you can do for yourself is always take good care of you. Listen to the thoughts rolling around in your head, get good exercise, eat well, try to have decent relationships with your other staff, and watch your thoughts. Again, you know, always being cognizant of what you think, because just like we teach our kids what they're thinking about first, that becomes an action. And so that's good or bad. And really love the work that you are doing. I'm going to open it up for questions now, or comments, if that seems appropriate. Hello. Let's see. There you are. I see you. Oh, and can I take a picture? Or maybe you already did it, but if we could have a screenshot before I ever leave of people, if they were willing.
Quite a few.
So much fun. But anyway, yes, questions, thoughts, responses. I'm all in.
Let me get everyone here. I've got everyone on mute here, so let me make it where everyone.
This has been so much fun today.
All right, so I've got it turned back on to where everyone can unmute themselves and ask questions, or throw it in the chat.
Don't be shy.
So,
You can ask weird questions too. I mean, don't hesitate. Because everyone else does when I do speaking events. I'm not kidding. People have gotten right in the thick of my personal life or this or that. I'm like, oh, how many cats do I have? All of it. You know, nothing is off base.
So I guess hard in the pun here, but Miss Meredith is an open book.
That's right. That's right. You know, when I first started writing the book, which by the way took 20 years to finish, but when I first started writing the book, the early chapters, I said, my life feels like a made for lifetime television movie. I just want to find the remote to turn the channel. And my editor made me take that out. And it became so ironic years later when it actually became one. I'm like, wow, the power of suggestion. I should have said, I think I'm going to have $1 million, and maybe that would have come true, but so far not. So
I think we've all wish that like at least once a week.
Right, exactly. Exactly right. It's surely been a great group to be with today. And just, you know, keep in mind, I do sometimes trauma-informed care training or adverse childhood experiences, but I just love being here. And it's just fun to be in Tennessee and feel like I have a little bit of roots. I have some roots here now. I got to do 2 conferences so far in Tennessee.
I do believe that I can speak on behalf of the entire state that we are happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much. I so appreciate it, Harrison. I love it because it was just such an exciting thing that you reached out. I was like, yay.
So we do have one question that just popped up in the chat box. Jamie Snell wants to know, what did you do to manage your mental health while your children were in another country?
Good question. And I'm writing about that now because I get asked a lot of like, what were your survival techniques? And it's not like I know everything or that I was amazing all the time. I wasn't. I already had a lot of history of trauma. So there is a certain part of me that feels very removed from my life. And when I was a kid, I used to think, you know, my life was like a book. There's a beginning that you just inherit, right? You never write your life's beginning. In the middle part, you can do some work to help influence the end and, you know, write the ending that you want. And for me, a friend had told me even before I think my kids were missing, hey, look, you don't have 24 hours a day to feel sorry for yourself. I got to be honest with you. You've got 1 hour a day you should assign to this. And so you've got to work because you're not rich. So keep working. You know, of course, you're going to do the things like go to therapy, which I did when I could. Get exercise, try to eat well, try to treat yourself when you're going through something horrifying. And I would say you see this in the pandemic, you know, not to be mean, but people, you know, we knew that people might be more suspect or might be more vulnerable if they had certain health conditions. You want to be able to treat yourself so well that you're just going to be bulletproof almost. And who knows with pandemic, but I just mean in trauma in general, you want to treat yourself like you deserve, like you're going to run the race of your lifetime. I guess that's it. You are going to run the race of your lifetime. You're preparing for battle. And so I really took that seriously, where I kind of watched what I ate a little more, got more exercise because of course kids weren't with me. So of course I had that time. I spent 1 hour a day where I really could fall apart and cry and get angry and blame people and get, you know, upset. But the other 23 were spent sleeping and working and doing things that were good for the race ahead. And whatever we're going through in life that looks like it's going to be a long-term slog, you know, whether you're going through a divorce or whether you're going through whatever, if it looks like it's going to be difficult, that's the time we need to double down the most and really make sure that we're not sitting alone in our pain. Sometimes I went to group, kind of peer group support things. Actually, I'm a big fan of peer support as well as getting professional support in therapy and exercise, and just making sure that the diet that I like best, which is always lots of cheese, sugar, and white flour, that's an anxiety producing diet in itself. That's basically the American diet, but it is anxiety producing. And so I really started to minimize those things a little bit more than usual. And that helped. That really did. Some of the things, just like with our kids, some of the coping mechanisms that I had that were helpful, like that 1 hour a day feeling bad, my worry hour, we called it. It's a worry hour, where it was like 1 hour. I put everything, whenever intrusive thoughts came about my kids, I would say, this is not the time. That really became a very unhealthy coping mechanism later when the kids were back, because I had a hard time reconnecting to my feelings. And being so distant is not really how you want to live your life healthfully. So you have to watch for what helps you in the crisis. Does it serve you afterward? And some of those things did to this day. Like when we come through hard times, whether it's tornado warning, when you all have when we have a tornado warning, I need a pizza. Like I look for anything that has flour. I just have to. It's so scary for me. I don't know. We have earthquakes in Alaska, like 8 point something was our last big one. But these tornado warnings are killing me. But in theory, I need to say to myself, I deserve the best thing because this might be my last minutes of life, or I need to have the best response possible. So exercise, therapy, eating decently, support, and not letting my intrusive thoughts eat up my life. Anyone else want pizza when they're going through something horrible? Because I feel like that's a natural. And Chattanooga is kind of a foodie place, it turns out. There's lots of good things to eat here. Anyone else gone to Alaska, by the way? If anyone is thinking about Alaska, your good months are mid-May to mid-June. Run! But no, really, it's such a beautiful state. But if you want good weather that you could take your coat off, that's your time. Run quickly. It's just so lovely. I've worked in tourism in Alaska too. After my kids grew up, I worked a summer for Holland America, and it is a beautiful place to visit. I highly recommend that you do. And I do miss parts of it and my friends and my kids. Anyone else? Any fun questions, sad questions, anything?
So we do have another question here in the chat box from Miss Hampton. She wants to know, what is the best piece of advice that you can give people working in the
just in general, working in the DJJ system?
I believe so.
Okay, just in general, I would say that absolute self-care, including you telling yourself when you make great efforts and you're following the ever-changing, I know it's always changing. We have new thoughts, schools of thoughts that come in the DJJ system, new tools that we're using to get information about kids, new interventions. It does get old. It does. Just when you're learning one thing and you're seeing some success, then somebody else will come along and like, nope, this is what we're doing. The main thing is you really have to make your efforts for the right reasons. I think working with victims is also very affirming in a strange way, even though they're not always the happiest people. But you need to be able to tell yourself, I did everything that I could this day. I did everything that I could this day, and reward yourself. You don't wait for a supervisor to stand up and give you standing ovation because everyone's busy, tired, and stressed. And the courts, probably not. They're not going to often, reward you. And some kids do, and sometimes they're the wrong kids. Sometimes those are the groomy kids that tell you, oh, you're my favorite probation officer. I wish I had you, whatever. That's to be monitored. But you need to be really comfortable that you are in it for the right reasons, taking good care of yourself. And part of that is just saying, I showed up today, I gave my best. And that felt really good because I'm making a difference in this important job in the lives of kids, which are absolutely our future. And I would say, don't keep candy on your desk. I would also say, we as a probation officer, we used to have candy on everyone's desks. And you go into one, it was amazing. The weight we would gain, like the teeth, I had my first cavities working in probation, but we started cleaning up and started walking together sometimes at lunch hour. It may not be practical in these days and times, but I had a supervisor once that I could never get her attention unless I was walking. She liked to walk a lot on lunch hour. She was gone a lot, but she liked to walk on lunch hour. And she used to say to me, well, we could talk about that case if you'll go walking with me. And I'm like, great. The last thing I wanted to do was put on tennis shoes and go walking with her. And it caught my attention, like changed my life. I would have never thought that that would make a difference. Not taking your lunch hour may seem like a wise thing to do day after day. Some of us are martyrs, such as myself. And I gave a lot of free hours to DJJ. I don't know that anyone's helped by that, but definitely taking your breaks and getting your shoes on and getting out of the office, that was life-changing. I started doing that by myself after I kind of got good at it. She used to walk pretty fast and I would have to stop and wait. And it was about a year later, after walking, I just go by myself on lunch hour and just walk. And people used to say, my coworkers, it's kind of mean, but that's who I am. They'd say, hey, can I walk with you at lunch hour? And I'm like, nope, thanks. But I just needed to sort my thoughts and I was less reactive when I got away and got a little bit of fresh air. And maybe walking an hour a day isn't everyone's cup of tea, but I'll tell you, everyone could do at least 10, 15 minutes and get out of the building. Staying at your desk and taking those calls and seeing the emails ping and hearing the complaints and the stress. And just when you're going to take a moment for yourself, your coworker comes in and unloads on what happened to them, which is great, but you still need to take your breaks. You will show up better for other people if you first show up well for you.
So does anyone else have a question? Okay, well, I do have a short little poll here because if everyone will help participate and help Miss Meredith out here.
Would it be better if I muted it so no one felt pressured?
Oh, no, you are completely fine.
Okay.
Because it's what we talked about the other day. If we get some feedback, to maybe go on your website or anything like that. So I do have a short little poll here, just a little review of Miss Meredith part 1 and part 2. So let's see here.
I'm going to send you my SpongeBob picture of my daughter just for the fun of it, because she knows I use this for my slideshow, but it is so cute. It was the year. It was the year that everything changed. And if you want to, you could post it in there. I'm just going to send it to you, Harrison.
All right, so this old laptop is not work at all anymore. So you will
Here's my
get
daughter. She's so cute. I love that. It was a successful party in 2013. You've done a really good job despite your laptop issues.
you should see my desk. I have got wires and 4 screens all over the place trying to
Oh, wow.
put everything up and running.
That's
Staying up to date on tech isn't always
right.
the
The
quickest.
priority.
So, all right, so I guess what I will do in order to get the reviews and stuff from everyone that was here for your presentations is I will just send out a quick link for a survey to all of the participants, and then they can fill that out, and then I'll share that with you. That way you will have all of that.
Oh, I so thank you. And thanks so much for having me today. Great to meet you all. I wish I could have met you all in person, but this was delightful.
Yes, we were sad that it wasn't, as planned. It would only been a 2-hour drive, but at least, we saved gas this way.
Right, exactly right. Good for the environment. And thank you for the nice chat box comment. And I appreciate it. You all have a wonderful day. It was terrific to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Let's see how we leave. Okay.
All righty, I guess we'll go ahead and take lunch and be back at 1 o'clock.
little or